And you've been to Brazil how many times now?
You know, man, 5, 6,
Good.
8 times.
So you're definitely not a stranger to Brazilian and Brazilian musicians. And
No.
Good.
And the New York Brazilian scene.
You're a veteran, actually.
Wow.
Veteran in the Brazilian scene.
Inspired by it, for sure.
And you're familiar with the Jobim and João Gilberto?
That music, sure.
Good. So my question
You
is...
know, at the beginning, through Stan Getz, early
Yeah.
on, you know.
So my question is very pertinent. I'm glad because my question is very pertinent. Okay. So Joe, this is the first time, and not the first time that you play with a Brazilian musician and you're exposed to Brazilian musician and music, but it's the first time you play with Ivo Perelman. How did it go? Do you see a Brazilian way of playing? How was your experience today from the Brazilian bicultural point of view?
I'd like to say that playing with Ivo Perelman today was a pleasure, man, and to feel his energy and spirit and ideas and feeling from his blood, from his Brazilian roots, you know. And as an improviser, I think he's one of the most creative players today on the scene, you know. So it was really wonderful to explore some music together and create pieces of music. The inner orchestrations and the structures that appeared and we developed within, I think could never be repeated. It was the idea of jazz, you know, to create music within the music and listen, follow and lead and follow. So that aspect of what we did today was magical and beautiful. And I was feeling his Brazilian roots in his rhythm and in his expression. When I was really young, just out of high school, I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston in 1971 and 2 in those years, and had a chance to meet Victor Brazil and Claudio Roditi and Alfredo Cardin, pianist, and had a chance to play with some cats from Brazil. At that time, I was maybe 19 or 20, you know. And that was a thrill for me because it was some jazz musicians that you know, were from another country that had the jazz influences of the masters, because you heard Charlie Parker, you heard Lee Morgan, and Kenny Dorham, and others. You heard Herbie Hancock in their playing, but they had their own feeling and way of expressing it, you know? And that was beautiful, man. My dad played saxophone, okay? He was one of the leading players in Cleveland, you know, where I grew up. And he was born in 1925 and grew up in that swing and bebop and modern jazz into more of the freer jazz expressions as a player himself. So I grew up with his record collection and hearing stories about him hearing Charlie Parker and Lester Young, playing at a jam session with Coltrane in the early 50s when Coltrane came to Cleveland on alto with a blues band, you know. And there was always a story about my dad playing with his quartet opening for Stan Getz. This is maybe 1952 or so, 51, those years. And my mom was there. You know, they had just, they were engaged, so it must have been around 1950, I guess, you know. And so Stan Getz was another player that my dad had a lot of his recordings through the years, you know. So probably my awareness of the Brazilian influences in jazz were through Stan Getz's recordings, you know, with Jobim and Astrid Gilberto. So that always felt good, you know. The music was inspired and inspiring, you know. And then moving to New York in the mid-'70s, around the same time that Claudio came to New York, and there was a bunch of Brazilian cats on scene, you know, from then to this day, you know, the Duca Fonseca and Mausha, his wife Mausha, and certain players, man, that I played with a lot through the years, you know, Dom Salvador also. And it's such an amazing music, jazz, because it's so multi-generational and multicultural. And everyone has their own feeling from where they're from, you know, their blood. And when that can come through in your spiritual expression in music, I think that that's where the magic is, and that's created this amazing art form through the years.
Beautiful, beautiful answer. Okay, so let's go through quickly the few questions. Tell us about your large collection of musical instruments, in particular reed instruments.
You know, my collection of instruments is growing all the time from my travels around the world, you know, and also just listening a lot to folk music, you know, from the Orient and Africa and, you know, Eastern European countries, you know, as well as the music from the States, you know, Native American music and Afro-American music, you know, the feelings and the rhythms and the instruments, you know, that have developed through the years, some ancient instruments. I have a collection of wood flutes, let's say, non-chromatic flutes that are in different keys. And you have to find the half steps and the different intervals, you know, within them, from the Middle East and from the Orient and Asia, you know, and North Africa. Percussion instruments also. I have a collection of gongs and balafon, a koto, and shakers and bells that I collect along the way when I'm touring, you know. And I use them in my music. I've documented quite a few things through the years with all of these feelings. And in more recent years, I've been playing the teragato, which is a Hungarian folk instrument, you know. It's like half saxophone, half clarinet. You know, it comes apart. You finger it in your left hand like a saxophone. In your right hand is like an Albert system clarinet. And it's open holes, and it's in B flat like a soprano range. And it's got these beautiful colors and things you can do on that horn. That's really different, you know. Also in this session, I brought my G mezzo soprano, which is up a fourth from concert, but it's between an alto and a soprano saxophone. This has a beautiful, distinctive area in the sound, you know, in the pitches. And I had it made for me in Copenhagen. There's an instrument maker. His name is Peter Jessen. And my serial number is 02 on my instrument. And I got it in 2010. Was when he finished. It took him a year and a half to make it, you know. So I brought that today to play with Ivo. And I also brought my C Melody saxophone, which I have an old Chu Berry C Melody, the alto type neck, with a handmade mouthpiece by Francois Louis in Brussels, Belgium. He made a mouthpiece for me that's in between a tenor mouthpiece and an alto mouthpiece. So it really speaks. It has an amazing voice, this instrument. And it's from the 20s, and it's the Chu Berry model, the same model tenor that Lester Young played. But I think my wood flutes, when I vibrate on those instruments, also a kaval from Bulgaria, when I take those on the road and I vibrate on them and just meditate on some tonalities, it definitely influences the way I'm trying to vibrate on the saxophone, you know. So studying those instruments has been amazing, man. And I think I started from my first tour in Europe, where I was with the Woody Herman Band in 1976, and we went to London and played at Ronnie Scott's, which is right near Chinatown. I found a gong shop and a Oriental shop there, Rayman's Music, and I bought my first musette and gongs there. I think 1977, and since then it's been a passion and a part of my development as a musician.
Cool, great answer. All right, okay. Professor Bruce Rayburn said that music that developed in New Orleans is a form of collective improvisation. Do you think that spirit lives in today's music?
You know, jazz music is a collective, spontaneous music that develops from within a community of players, and the different generations of musicians through the years have all had that aspect of improvising together to create a tapestry of rhythm, harmony, and melody. You know, with the melody as a focus, but yet the rhythm as a focus in the driving force, and the harmony with the colors and the different variations of sounds, you know, that you can create within. So, yeah, jazz music is about that, but it's also about your individual history and your study on your instrument, to know your horn and to be very deep into the ideas and concepts about rhythm. Everybody's a drummer on their instrument, you know. Everyone has a sense of what a piano can do in the voicings and sounds. And everyone is a singer. To sing and let the melody vibrate, you know, and fill the room with sound, you know. Your sound is your approach as a musician. And the more you get into that idea, the more you're going to be able to listen and create music together with other folks.
Very good. Excellent. Can you describe how your Sicilian heritage might have any echoes in your work? If Joe, and then in parentheses he says, if Joe feels like talking about Italy, you could bring up his record Viva Caruso, which is one of my favorites, the film guy.
Mm. Mm. You know, I think my Sicilian roots are run very deep for me. You know, I'm second generation Sicilian American. You know, my grandparents all came from two villages in Sicily. The Lovano Ferracci families came from Alcata Le Fuse. And my mother's family, Verzi Sereniti families, came from Cesaro. Both these villages are on a mountain. You could see Mount Etna. You know, they're Province Messina. Taormina and Catania are close, you know. And I've visited these places many times through the years and have had a chance to play music there and meet so many cousins and family on my mother's side and my father's side. So it's I feel the energy and the the volcanic energy of those villages, you know, and my family roots that go back, you know, to the beginning, run very deep for me, you know, the feelings of that, you know, and touring in Europe and playing in Italy a lot through the years with Paul Motion and Bill Frisell and Charlie Hayden Liberation Music Orchestra, Elvin Jones, Carla Bley's band, exploring music of Nino Rota with Carla Bley, you know. I've had a lot of different experiences trying to be myself as a saxophone player and improviser within some really beautiful folk music, you know, in some of those bands, you know. My recording Viva Caruso is something that developed for me. Studying Caruso's life, imagining what it was like as if he was a kid growing up, the music he heard, you know, and then coming to New York and being a part of the Metropolitan Opera and playing all these different characters, each role that he played. He was a different personality, but he gave his voice, had this expression and power, majestic delivery. And as I developed as a jazz musician and studying all of the masters, there was a moment when I read that Louis Armstrong used to carry Caruso recordings on the road with him, with a record player, 78s, you know, a Victrola. And then you listen to Louis Armstrong play, and he has this majestic, incredible sound and vibration, you know, that was inspired by Caruso. So that gave me inspiration to like try to be myself and play some folk music and use my imagination to create a street band. You know, there were no clubs, there were no there weren't venues like we know them. There was a lot of street music when he was growing up, you know, in Naples. So I tried to imagine putting some bands together that had a street band kind of quality. And then on the other side, an opera house sound, you know. So Byron Olson, amazing musician and composer and arranger, he orchestrated some compositions, some old folk songs that Caruso sang in a modern sound with an opera house type ensemble. And then I put a street band together and wrote some music that can offset and, you know, give some energy that was more folk-like in a jazz flow, you know, in a jazz-free fashion. Not a free jazz fashion, a jazz-free fashion. And that's the music that, for me, I think we recorded that in 2003 or somewhere around there. For me, that idea has really lived on through the years, and it's something that I'm still exploring today as a saxophone player and as an improviser. And I think the music, to just bring it back to the session with Ivo, had a jazz-free feeling today. We were improvising as jazz players in a free-flowing manner, creating the harmony, creating the rhythm, creating the melodies that came through, you know. And for me, that's what's happening in the music.
Sensational, great, fantastic. All right, some of your early influences were John Coltrane, Dizzy Gillespie, and Sonny Stitt. Who inspire you now?
I'd say some of my main influences through the years have been some of the master musicians that were in my dad's record collection, which included John Coltrane, Dizzy Gillespie, Sonny Stitt, Gene Ammons, Lester Young and Ben Webster, Thelonious Monk, Miles Davis, and all the players that played with those cats. You know, McCoy Tyner and Herbie Hancock and Bud Powell, you know, Max Roach, big influence. Max Roach, Clifford Brown Band with Harold Land, and then with Sonny Rollins, you know. Dexter Gordon, okay. The two tenor powerful recordings with Wardell Gray and Dexter, and then Gene Ammons and Dexter, and Sonny Stitt and Sonny Rollins with Dizzy, you know, and Stan Getz with Dizzy also and Sonny Stitt. Through the years then, Pharoah Sanders, Albert Eiler, who was also from Cleveland, big influence, man. Growing up, studying Tad Dameron's music, who was from Cleveland, and my dad played with Tad. Knowing he was from Cleveland, he was a main architect in bebop, you know, as an arranger and a songwriter, along with Thelonious Monk. And then having Albert Eiler from Cleveland, you know, was very strong for me, realizing those two cats were from the town I'm from, you know, and not only to study the music and to try to be expressive in it, but to represent your roots and where you're coming from as a young player trying to get yourself together, you know. And then, of course, coming to New York in the mid-'70s and playing with other saxophone players, you know, like David Liebman and Michael Brecker, you know, and having a chance to play a concert at Jazz Lincoln Center with Teddy Edwards, Vaughn Friedman, and Johnny Griffin, a 4-saxophone concert, you know. Standing toe-to-toe with those cats and putting a set of music together and feeling their embrace, man, it was amazing, man. And one of my first times where I really felt the embrace of someone was with the Woody Herman Band, feeling Woody's embrace. I was 23 at the time, and we played a concert at Carnegie Hall for Woody's 40th anniversary year celebration as a band leader. And we played as a band, our saxophone section. We played all the parts. Frank Tiberian, lead tenor, which was another one of my main influences and mentors through the years, you know. We were in the sax section together. And the stars were Al Cohn and Zoot Sims and Flip Phillips and Jimmy Giuffre and Stan Getz, you know, along with others that the Condoli brothers, different folks on different instruments in the band, you know, as soloists. Phil Wilson on trombone and Don Lamont on drums, who was on the original Four Brothers with Stan, you know, which we played those arrangements and those cats all played the solos. But I had a chance to go to the front microphone and play my part with Stan Getz playing lead on Early Autumn, you know? And man, I didn't want to just go and play my notes. I grew up playing with my dad, playing two tenors. So I had a real understanding about breathing and phrasing and dynamics, you know? And to stand next to Stan Getz, play my part, and having his embrace while we were playing, feeling that. But then afterwards, too, just, you know, standing man to man, you know, even though I was a kid at 23. When Stan originally recorded that in the 40s, 47, I think, he was 19 or 20 when he was on Woody's band at that time, you know. But, you know, through the years, feeling the embrace of who you play with has been inspiring and very influential for me to go further and try to develop more of a beautiful approach and sound.
Bravo. Okay, 2 more. Actually, 3 more. It seems like you are extremely adaptable and multifaceted, playing many different instruments and so many different music styles with a variety of musicians. Was it from a basic curiosity within you? Is it a great source of inspiration?
It's been a great source of inspiration for me to explore music within the multi-generational world of jazz and music that we live in, and the multicultural world we live in. And moving to New York at a young age, coming to New York to play the 2 years before I moved to New York, like 1974 and 5, I was a member of Brother Jack McDuff's band. He called the Heating System. It was a 4 saxophone band with another great tenor player, David Young, who was a mentor and someone very influential for me. He played with George Russell in the early 60s from Indianapolis. And Dr. Lonnie Smith. First time I came to New York to really play was with Dr. Lonnie Smith, playing some gigs and recording my first recording as a sideman on Lonnie's recording, Aphrodisia. And so those 2 years I came to New York to play within those bands. I was hanging in town and sitting in and going to Studio Rivby to hear Sam Rivers, going to Ali's Alley, Rashid Ali's place on Green Street, and I brought my horn there and ended up sitting in and meeting Rashid for the first time, and then through the years playing with him often, you know. Having his embrace was amazing, man, at that age, you know, after really growing up and listening to him with Coltrane, the Meditations recording, also Interstellar Space, the duets with John Coltrane. Meeting him and being in his audience and then having him in my audience, that was something, man. That was a big inspiration for me, you know. So playing with players is what it was all about for me, you know. Playing with folks and within the congregation of the setting of the music and the congregation of the full room that you're playing in with the audience, you know. They speak a lot about the church in jazz, you know. And that's, to me, that's what that means, is being a part of a congregation. Now, when you're the soloist and you're stating the themes of things, you're the preacher. But then you're within the ensemble. You're within that congregation of musicians or, you know, the ensemble you're in. But then the whole room is a part of that dance, you know. So that has always been very important for me. And I went out and put myself in situations where I sat in with Chet Baker and played some gigs with him. Then after that, I sat in with Elvin Jones in the mid-'70s, and through the years had a relationship with him where I toured with him in Europe. 1987, we did a 9-week European tour where I was a part of the Elvin Jones Jazz Machine, you know. And then in 97, he participated on my recording trio Fascination with Dave Holland on bass, where I wrote all the music to play with Dave and Elvin. And that was a very high point for me. I call one of my shining hours, you know, but also like playing with Ed Blackwell and doing a record on Enja with Anthony Cox on bass called The Sounds of Joy, That was in 1989. You know, along the way, like, the more people you meet and you share music with and you can shape music with when you play together, you know. Paul Motion with Bill Frisell and I from 1981 till Paul's passing in 2011. Bill and I played with Paul for 30 years, man, and toured countless times in the States, but mainly in Europe and in Asia. The Mel Lewis, Thad Jones, Mel Lewis band, you know, with Bob Brookmeyer, you know. More recent times playing with Hank Jones. And now my new trio, which I call Trio Tapestry, with Marilyn Crispell on piano. And Carmen Castaldi on drums, who's a drummer that I grew up with from Cleveland. And he moved to the West Coast when I came to New York. But now he's back east. He's a part of my Viva Caruso recording also. He's one of the 4 drummers that are on that recording. Yeah, with Joey Barron, Bob Meyer, and Jamie Haddad. You know. But yeah, having the embrace of the cats on the scene has always driven me and still does to this day.
Now, he says, being one of the most prolific leaders, sidemen of the last 40 years, are there any living musicians you still hope to record or perform with in the future?
You know, the future is a mystery about your encounters and how you carry yourself and put yourself in different situations. You know, one future project that's going to happen, is taking shape right now, is I'm collaborating with a more contemporary music composer, Douglas Cuomo, and we have a commission through the London's Philharmonic for him to write a piece for me for a symphony orchestra. And then a commission came in from the Fort Worth Symphony also. And so into next year, I'm going to be working on this piece of music that's coming together. I have one of the movements now that I'm working on already and looking at and trying to imagine what it's going to be like, you know. So there's many different things that happen in a magical way in this music, you know, and in your lifetime. That's something I never thought would happen. That is happening, you know. I think through the years you develop ideas and you play with folks. Dave Douglas and I have a quintet we call Sound Prince that is an ever-evolving quintet. And we have a recent release out called Other Worlds now, and the band features Linda Mahon O on bass and Lawrence Fields on piano and Joey Barron on drums. And we have future concerts and things coming up. There's some players on the scene that I really dig, that I know in the future we will do some stuff with, you know. More recently, and something that had developed through the last maybe 4 or 5 years, is playing with Tyshawn Sorey. And Bill Frisell and I and Tyshawn just did some recording. We have a trio we call 3 as 1. And we have a week at the Village Vanguard coming up on next February, 2022. So there's some things happening that are inspiring and hopefully are going to take shape the way they do.
Okay, great. Now there's a couple of things, last 2 things. I think you've mentioned, you've touched upon this, but if you want to add something, I'm going to just repeat what he wrote. But
Okay.
I think you already answered that.
Okay.
Those. Your unique sense of rhythm and phrasing seems to unite your playing throughout your diverse musical output. Could you speak a bit about how you approach rhythm and phrasing? And he says, I remember Lovano saying interesting things on this before. And the other one that I think you touch upon is, your earlier career is associated to the New York loft scene. You mentioned it. Can you speak a bit about that time? Who were the folks renting the lofts? Besides jazz musicians, did other artists frequent those sessions? Do you think there are clear indications of a beginning or ending of the so-called loft scene?
When I moved to New York in the mid-'70s, the loft scene in Manhattan was really strong. And I was so fortunate to actually move into and have my own loft space on 23rd Street and 7th Avenue. It was a 1,800 square foot loft. It was the first floor above a bar, right? The bar downstairs was a Blarney Stone. And I could play till midnight every night with drums. Okay? It was a loft. There were 3 floors above me. And luckily, the floor above me, a drummer lived. So I was able to play and have sessions and invite people to my loft to play every day. And I lived in this space over 20 years, from 1978. During that time, in that area in Chelsea, there were many musicians that had lofts. David Liebman had a space off of 6th Avenue. There was a loft, I think it was on 18th Street. It was also 3 or 4 floors that in the early 70s, I think Chick Corea lived there and Michael Brecker had one of the spaces there. Different folks lived in that building. And when I lived in my loft, there were other cats that lived there, you know. We used to go there to play. Bill Evans had a loft up 7th Avenue where we used to play a lot, you know. Jerry Bergonzi had an apartment, but he could play in his pad too, you know. Just in my neighborhood, there were 5 or 6 places that I could go any time, and there was music happening, you know. But I felt so fortunate because I had a space where I could invite people over, right? And I developed and rehearsed there with all of the folks that I played with throughout the late 70s, all of the 80s and all of the 90s into the 2000s, you know? And that was amazing, man. But like Sam Rivers, his place, Studio Rivby, was a loft. He lived upstairs, and the first floor was a space that he rehearsed and gave concerts. There was no food or liquor. They were living spaces in a way where you could, or performance spaces, you know. Rashid's Club also, Ali's Alley, was another loft space that a lot of music happened. You know, things are different today. Some zoning laws changed during my time in my loft. You know, we were with the loft board, and there were many meetings and a lot of dues to have a loft also. But the loft zoning changed, and anything north of 23rd Street and east of 7th Avenue, all of those spaces were illegal living spaces. So the landlords would have to bring those buildings up to code for you to be able to really live there, you know? So a lot of those lofts disappeared. My loft, I was on the corner of 23rd and 7th, so I was protected under some strange New York City loft or dwelling rules. So I was protected for a while, so I didn't lose my loft. But my building, we were on rent strikes and went through many. Was on my third landlord, and the violations led to a fire in the electrical in my building. So when I had to split, it was because of this incident that happened, you know. So yeah, I think in the 60s and 70s, that loft scene in New York was alive and well, man. And a lot of music and energy and creative, spontaneous sessions happened, you know. I know Dave Liebman and Michael Brecker, along with Bob Berg and Steve Grossman, a lot of saxophone players. There's a lot of myths and legends that happen in this music. And I know Dave and others could even speak more on this subject about the loft scene in New York, you know, the poets and the artists. And, luckily, we still have the Village Vanguard, who goes back to the 30s, that kind of represents a place where all of the players that developed their music in the lofts were able to present that music, you know, in a venue like the Village Vanguard, for example, you know. So yeah, that energy and inspired music, I feel today, and is still with me, because I had a part of experiencing it, you know. And when I play today, man, I'm trying to call the spirits from that experience.